The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hey everyone, this is Tullio Siragusa with the Bliss Business Podcast. I am very excited to introduce a series of podcasts that are going to really help marketers or wannabe marketers understand the fundamentals of what it takes to turn your marketing spend into an investment that produces a return on the dollars you're spending, and not looking at it as a cost. Often a lot of organizations do that. So part of our mission to fuse more empathy into the marketplace is to understand that not everybody understands these fundamentals. So we're going to cover 5 different series. We're going to have a series of 5 different conversations, all focused on the same topic. I want to introduce the guest that I have here with Zero Company, Joshua Prizer. Joshua, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Zero Company.
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Digital Marketing. So my role here, I've been with Zero Company for more than 20 years now and been in the digital marketing space for that long as well. And my role here really is to oversee the other account executives and make sure that each campaign is fulfilling its potential. And so that's, I would say, the joy that I get, the fun part of my day is watching businesses grow and seeing how oftentimes, especially for small businesses, how that can really change people's lives, and help people reach the goals that they want to, whether that's, putting their kids through college, getting that second vacation home, retiring early, et cetera. That's really the joy for me, is helping businesses go from here up to there.
Awesome. Well, that aligns very well with the theme of our podcast. What does BLISS stand for? Build love into scalable systems. So it sounds like we're in really good hands. Here's the topics we're going to cover over 5 different conversations. On episode 1, which is this one, we're going to cover the basics of marketing investment. The topic is turning costs into investments, the fundamentals of marketing spend. In episode 2, we're going to talk about how to set goals and expectations around your marketing investment. The title will be Setting the Stage, Goals and Expectations for Maximizing ROAS. There's a term that might be new to some people. You might have been expecting ROI. We're going to talk about ROAS and what that is. And then in episode 3, we're going to talk about measuring your marketing investment performance. And the title is going to be Crunching the Numbers, Measuring Marketing Performance for Better ROAS. There's that word again. And then in episode 4, we're going to talk about analyzing and optimizing your marketing spend. And the title of that show will be From Data to Decisions, Analyzing and Optimizing for Peak Performance. It's going to be a really interesting conversation there. And finally, episode 5 will be about future-proofing your marketing investment strategy. And the title of that show will be Beyond the Horizon, Future-Proofing Your Marketing Investment. So that's what you have to look forward to. Let's get started with episode 1, Turning Costs into Investment. Now, I've been in a marketer for a long time and often have struggled either as a CMO or in some other capacity, convincing the executives or the CEO or the owner that marketing isn't a cost. It is really an investment in the business. But to make that an investment in the business, you do have to understand how to measure it in such a way that produces results that amplify the business, not take away from its profits. So let's dive right in. In your opinion, what distinguishes a marketing cost from a marketing investment? Let's clarify that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And really, I think before diving into that, I think we need to talk a little bit about the sales funnel and the different areas we want to target in the sales funnel, whether that's top of funnel, mid funnel, or bottom of funnel. Because I think too often we see companies who want to start with a top of funnel marketing campaign, and that's definitely a little bit more of a cost, not an investment, or at the very least, a long-term investment. with a top of funnel campaign, we're promoting brand awareness, we're establishing trust, etc. The customer's in the awareness stage. They're just, maybe just figuring out what they need or even that they need. Whereas with a mid funnel campaign, we're hitting the customer when they're in that consideration stage. And with a bottom of funnel campaign, we're targeting the customer when they're in the purchase stage. So what your business does, the price point of your product or service, and the length of your sales funnel will help determine how much effort should go into each stage of that sales funnel, to help us, and let me even dive into an example that might make that a little clearer. Let's say you own a pest extermination business. So you buy a billboard in your area, promotes John's Pest Patrol. Now that's a perfect example of top of funnel marketing. Do the people driving by own a house? Do they have pest problems? Are they actively looking for your services?
And do they like the name John?
Yeah, maybe they like the name John. But did you succeed in putting your business name in their head so they think of you in the future? Possibly. Are you going to get a return on that investment right away? No, right? That billboard's a long-term play, and probably not the best use of marketing dollars if you're first starting out. But the flip side would be the consumer who just saw that mouse run across their floor, right? And they hear more in the attic. That person's grabbing their phone. They're doing a Google search for exterminator in my area, right? They're in the purchase stage. They are bottom of funnel. We need our ad to show up right then. So is there a place for top of funnel and mid funnel advertising? Yeah, absolutely. But, and Tullio, I'm sure you've heard it too, but I can't tell you how much my heart breaks every time I hear someone tell me a horror story of a marketing campaign that didn't work for them. And a lot of times it's because, like you said, they're viewing it as a cost, not an investment. But too often it's a tale of utilizing the wrong channel, right? They're starting too high in the funnel, and then they run out of funds before that long-term investment can pay off. So
what's an example of a middle of the funnel? We talked about the top of the funnel, the bottom of the funnel, like the midpoint. Is that like a nurturing part of the funnel?
I would say like most display advertising can really be top of funnel or mid funnel, but as you get more and more targeted, it becomes more mid funnel. But still, that person isn't necessarily actively looking for you, right? It's interruption marketing. They're doing something else, and you've put your message in front of them, hopefully the right person, but you're saying, hey, by the way, we think you might need this. And, it's going to have a lower conversion rate than bottom of funnel marketing. An example of bottom of funnel advertising would be like Google search, pay-per-click. You're putting your business in front of a customer at the exact moment they're actively looking for your services. And so I always recommend start with bottom of funnel advertising, because when you do that marketing budget immediately becomes an investment that should offer returns pretty quickly. You put in $5,000, I would expect to get 20,000 in business or whatever our ratio ends up being. But it's much easier to view marketing as an investment and not a cost by starting bottom of funnel.
Okay. So, that's also called the zero moment of truth, right?
Yep.
So bottom of the funnel, it's the moment someone's actually needing your services. So it's a good investment strategy. Why would I also want to do the other two? Is there a need to do the other two? Because when I think of a funnel, I think of like the bottom of the funnel, it's a quick opportunity, but then there's got to be stuff that feeds into it, right? So how does that work? And is it one or the other or all three? And how do you harmonize it in such a way that it still continues to be a valid investment?
No, that's exactly right. So you want to start bottom of funnel because that's the lowest hanging fruit, right? We're picking off the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest things to get sales and prove that our marketing campaign is an investment and is gonna turn profit quickly. So you start there, but you're right. Once you've tapped out everything you can along that bottom of the funnel, it's important to start moving up the funnel and start grabbing mid-funnel tactics that then push traffic to that bottom of funnel. And then once you tap that out, we move up to top of funnel. And, I can't remember. I know there's I can't remember which luxury car manufacturer it is. I think it might be Mercedes, but I think they view it as having a 20-year sales funnel, which is crazy to think about, right? But they know that, hitting someone when they're 18, that 18-year-old isn't going to be able to buy a Mercedes, right? But by the time they're 38, yeah, that might be more of an option. So they're working top of funnel on that demographic. As their consumer ages, they're going to work more bottom of funnel. So it's definitely important to have all three strategies. My recommendation for most businesses is start bottom of funnel, make sure that's tapped out, and then you start moving up and getting more and more advanced in your techniques.
Okay, so multiply your dollars and then reinvest some of those to keep feeding into the pipeline. All right. So is that a good way to distinguish cost versus investment?
Yeah, because as we're going to get into, if you're tracking properly, you should be able to see whatever your goal is, a 1x, 2x, 5x, 10x return on that investment, right? Shouldn't be just a line item cost in your budget. And there's multiple reasons for that, but one of them is that we want to be able to measure the results of what we're doing. And if we're doing it right, we should be able to see that, when we put more dollars in, we get a higher return. And we put less dollars in, we get a lower return.
Okay, so how have they traditionally viewed marketing spend? And is this view changing?
Yeah, I think it is changing. Again, a lot depends on the size of the business, but I would say most of the time it's a hard number. It's okay, I'm going to spend this amount a month or this amount a quarter or this amount a year. Things are going great, the marketing budget is the same. Things are going poorly, the marketing budget doesn't change. But what we found in reality is the most effective campaigns have flexible budgets. As the market shifts and conversion rates increase or decrease, the budget adjusts accordingly. And that really goes back to that cost versus investment discussion. If you view marketing as an investment and the market changes and we go from earning 5x to 2x, do we want our marketing budget to stay the same? Maybe not. Maybe we want to pull back our budget a bit and either figure out how to increase our margins or wait for the market to self-correct. We have one client where the market's constantly doing this. And we find that, okay, when it's down, let's spend less because we know it's going to correct in a couple weeks. It's going to adjust. So there's no reason for us to be putting our money in when we know it's going to change in 2 weeks or maybe even less. But
it sounds to me one of the biggest mistakes is to fix the marketing budget, like in an annual exercise. Okay, marketing manager, marketing VP, CMO, here's a budget for the year. But what I'm hearing is, okay, what if we have a run, sort of like we hit our stride, we have a successful campaign and we're turning opportunities into sales. You actually could end up slowing down growth because you have a fixed budget that really isn't being used strategically. So, what are the key components to a successful marketing investment strategy? Because that's the mindset I think we're trying to portray is don't look at marketing as a spend, look at it as a investment strategy for your business growth. What are the key components to doing that effectively?
Well, first thing is determining your primary goal, right? Is it to drive online sales? Is it to drive leads? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's I need to keep my sales staff busy during a slow season so I don't lose them, right? That's a very different goal. But figuring out what is my goal? What do I want to achieve with my marketing campaign? And then the second thing is how do I track that goal, right? Because again, you would never invest money and say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't, there's no way for me to know whether it goes up or down. It just, you know, no one would ever invest their money that way. You have to be able to track those results. And I know we're going to get a lot more into goal setting in our next episode. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah. So just before we go into the concept of ROAS, we've mentioned that earlier a few times. What I want to understand and clarify, is it really important? It sounds as though it would be really important to have an ongoing dialogue amongst the executive ranks or amongst the owners or amongst the marketing manager and the owner to discuss the performance of the marketing investment and adjust it dynamically versus, okay, we'll talk about it in a quarter or 6 months or even worse in a year. You know, how can marketers encourage that kind of cadence with ownership? What have you seen work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And a lot depends on the size of the company, right? A larger company is going to have more levels, more bureaucracy, and that's just the way it is. But, you know, with a smaller company, it's much more common for us to either have budget ranges. You know, we say, okay, our budget range is we're going to spend between this and this. And then if we feel like we need more, we'll come back to you and we'll have that dialogue and say, hey, by the way, we just went from earning 5x to 10x. You know, there's an opportunity here right now. Do we want to put in more dollars? And sometimes the answer is no, we don't have the bandwidth. You know, we can't do that right now. Okay, fair enough. But if the bandwidth is there, take it. The other thing is to have a budget that is maybe it's an annual budget, but there's flexibility to say, hey, when we see things going well, we're going to spend more of that annual budget. You know, each month we're not going to spend 1/12. You know, if things are going well, we're going to spend more than our 1/12 allocation. If things are not going well, we're going to spend less. And as we get closer to maybe each quarter, we revisit and go, hey, where are we at? Should we go back and look for more money, or no, we should adjust for the rest of the year? But again, having those conversations on a regular basis and being flexible with when do we need to add money and when is it okay to spend under budget?
Great. Okay, let's go right into it because I'm sure by now everybody's like, what's that ROAS thing you keep talking about? Can you explain the concept of ROAS and its importance in marketing investment?
Yeah, sure. So ROAS stands for return on ad spend. And again, this goes back to, you know, viewing our marketing budget as investment and tracking results. We want to be able to determine whether our campaign is generating revenue or losing revenue. And the way we calculate it is really simple. It's really how much revenue is generated by a specific ad campaign. So, you know, if we spend $5,000 and we generate $20,000 in revenue, our ROAS is 400%. Now, you know, is that good? You know, it depends on your business. You know, what's your overhead on each sale? You know, if you're a lead-based business, what's your conversion rate at each step in the sales funnel after you get the lead? Does your business specialize in one-off sales, or are you building that customer for life? You know, those are all key components in determining what your ROAS goal should be. And we'll get into those, I know, in future episodes. But I mean, I've seen businesses happy with a 50% ROAS, actually losing money on the initial sale because they're looking at lifetime value of their customer. And then other businesses that, hey, no, we have to generate 500% ROAS in order to be profitable. But that's where it gets important to walk through all of those stages to determine a realistic ROAS goal. Because if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a target, you're not really going to know whether you're profitable or not.
Now, interestingly enough, Josh, I have found, which I'm sure you've seen as well over the past 20 plus years doing this, a lot of marketers often fail to understand how the marketing spend and even the ROAS translates into the business impact, or how it actually determines EBITDA and profit. And Why is that, do you think? So the really good marketers will understand the actual cost of a sale, the profitability associated. They'll be able to have a formula that says, for every dollar we spent, we produce X amount of profit and X amount of, top line revenues that are aligned with the business metrics overall, the entire ROI strategy. What are some of the misconceptions about marketing budgets in terms of tying to ultimately ROI that you're seeing, and how can marketers overcome that?
Yeah, again, like we talked about, one of the biggest mistakes is having that inflexible budget, for sure. Also not having those conversations and internally to determine really what are my goals, and making sure that we're setting targets that hit those goals. On the topic of budget, I remember a client that came to us and they were spending $30,000 a month, and they said, well, we want things aren't working well. We want you to take it over, and the budget's $30,000 a month. And we did an initial audit. We took them on. We said, okay. And then we dove a little deeper, and immediately, really after the first month for sure, and I think it was even faster, our first recommendation was to cut his budget in half, to cut from 30 to 15. And I remember him being so surprised because, our fees are based on a percentage of ad spend. So he went, well, aren't you cutting, are you cutting your fees in half too? And yes, we are, because we realized the ROAS wasn't there, right? We realized when we really got into the tracking and realized what he was tracking, we realized, hey, if you keep up with this pace, you're going to be out of business in a year. And our goal here isn't a short-term relationship. Our goal first always is, how do we get your business to succeed? So that's going to be our first focus. We didn't need 30,000 a month to figure out what was working and what wasn't. We needed 15. We definitely needed that, but in that case, but we didn't need to spend that much until to get the campaigns right. So that was our first order of business. But another thing I'd say, another common mistake is not tracking every step through the sales funnel or guessing at the numbers. I can't tell you how many times I have a conversation with someone and I say, okay, you get a lead, and you get a lead. What's your conversion rate on that lead? And they go, I'd say 70%. I think it's about 70%. I go, okay, this person does not know, right? They have not actually tracked this. And again, sometimes at the beginning, you have to go with the best guess. But once we realize our problem points, okay, let's start tracking this, and then let's revisit it, right? We'll get into this more when we get into goals, but we might set our goals, but later, let's revisit that goal, because steps along that sales funnel, we might have guessed at a number and then realized, oh no, that number's off. Let's adjust.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I want to leave some pointers for both marketers and possibly even business owners who might be watching this. And let's validate these pointers. What I've heard is, make sure you understand how the dollars you're spending translate into the dollars you're making. So if a marketer is asking you, if you're an owner, marketer is asking you, what is the cost of sale? It's not that they're trying to get into the finances of your business, but they are, and it's necessary, because otherwise you're going to kind of just shoot in the dark. And if you're a marketer, asking for that isn't being intrusive in a small business. It's actually doing your job. It's being empathetic to the need of the business to provide value for the investment that's you made. Any other words of wisdom you want to share with those who might be watching?
Yeah, I think you've really covered it there. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this series, because I think there's a lot of valuable information we're going to be able to help small business owners. So this is fun.
Excellent. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we're going to talk about setting goals and expectations for your marketing investment. The title of the next podcast will be setting the stage, goals and expectations for maximizing ROAS. So come back and listen to that episode to learn how to properly set up those goals and expectations